The Ukrainian armed forces, after 7 to 8 months of occupation of Russian territory in Kursk, have very evidently made the call. And we talked about this a few days ago. Once intelligence was pulled, intelligence support from the United States, and we started to see the Russian attack on Kursk curl around Ukrainian positions. I like the Reuters use of the word curled around Ukrainian positions in the south, put immense pressure on the supply lines. And honestly, if you saw the updates of how many Ukrainian vehicles were getting lost on these roads into Sudzha for the last month, maybe even the last few months, and then you see this move around, I mean, the writing was on the wall. And so this was not unexpected, especially since the Russians have not only gained more ground, but it was done at the time that the United States had dropped intelligence support for the Ukrainians. And while we don't know how much that contributed to the Russians pushing the Ukrainians out of Sudzha, we do know that the Russians were evidently at least attempting to take advantage of the situation, of the intelligence shortage, because the problem is, if they were not giving the Ukrainians information about where these troop buildups are, or where the satellites are taking photos around certain airfields, so we have an idea of like what type of material that's going to be deployed against them. If we're not giving them that information, it makes it easier for the Russians to conceal not only troop buildups, but Air Force buildups, any type of buildup that could add pressure not only here, but in other locations as well. And so how much it contributed, I don't know, but the Russians certainly tried to take advantage, and now the Ukrainians are leaving Sudzha. So it was Sudzha in the Ukrainian incursion, we'll just call it the Ukrainian incursion, originally was able to get all the way out to the gates of Koronevo at its peak in the first or second or third month. But after that, they were pushed from those fields. They had this incursion that, I mean, generally kept this 60% occupied from the territory that they had taken originally. They were hovering around that number for a bit as the Ukrainian army rededicated more troops, more manpower, and units, veteran units, strong units, good fighting units from other parts of the front, as the Russians tried harder and harder to push the Ukrainians out. By January was the goal. The Russians wanted to push the Ukrainians out of Sudzha by January for Trump's inauguration, so that when talks supposedly could begin, you know, we're 52 days into the special negotiation operation. Within the negotiations haven't started. They wanted that this done so the Ukrainians wouldn't have this as leverage, so they could say, we're gonna say you give us that land and we'll give you this land. They didn't want the Ukrainians to have that leverage, and they didn't want this continuous embarrassment for the Russian government that Russians were unable to return to their homes and Russia was unable to protect Russian land. Now, the Russians that were expelled from this territory, when they come back and they find their homes decimated, those images, those cell phone videos that are going to come out are not going to be pretty. They're not going to be good. And I do not believe the Russian government has a lot of resources right now to pay for the rebuilding effort. Now, maybe things will change depending on sanction policy, as the Russians are angling hard to get sanctions removed. And if the Russians do have sanctions removed on things like gas and other, Russian industries, that will certainly allow them to hypercharge their war machine, whether or not it's peacetime and they're getting ready for the next, or the war is ongoing and the United States has decided that they no longer want to add that pressure onto the Russians, and they want the American economy to assist the Russian war effort. Either way, now the Ukrainians, after holding for 7 or 8 months, have been pushed out. They did a lot of damage in this area. These people coming home are obviously, those images are not going to be good for the regime. They don't have the money to repair these homes quickly. That's not going to be good. But this will be a big victory for Putin. He will advertise it as a big victory. He will say, look, we're dividing the West, as the United States in the Euro-Atlantic relationship has a big rift right now with Europe, and now we're regaining our territory as we continue to put pressure amongst the Ukrainians. Now, they're not doing great right now, the Russians in Kursk. The Russians in Kursk actually could face problems with encirclement, and they're getting messed up. But at the end of the day, this territory in Sudzha probably had much more political weight than the outcome of specifically the Battle of Kursk. But this, I just want to put that out there, that the entire front line is not one static this line is moving this way or this line is moving that way. But this certainly had a lot of political weight, and that's why the Ukrainians were here. They were here for the political weight. But then when the new administration came in, they didn't add any pressure. They didn't pass any new aid deals. They kind of rug pulled the Ukrainians when it came to aid. Not even kind of. They definitely rug pulled the Ukrainians when it came to aid, both intelligence and support, which costs nothing, and the aid that actually does cost something. Even though we haven't passed any new aid deals, everything that was being set was previously approved by Congress. The Ukrainians probably saw the writing on the wall. And as the Russians were taking advantage of the intelligence shortage, saw the writing on the wall, the fact the United States support for Ukraine is flaky at best, backstabby. If you talk to a lot of Ukrainians that will be honest, at least about how they feel. Either way, they don't know how long this war is going to go. The peace deal did not come. More support did not come. Support's not being cut off. And are they going to hold this territory in Sudzha when there's not only a possibility of encirclement, they could redouble more forces, put more forces in there to stop that threat of encirclement, but they might need those resources elsewhere. And these roads in the Sudzha are deadly right now. And so ultimately, while for the political weight that this could have held is substantial, and the damage done to Russia and what has been proven is not going to be unproven by the Russians pushing the Ukrainians out of Sudzha, I do believe it was ultimately the correct decision made by the ground forces. The ground forces, the person who's at the head of the ground forces right now for the Ukrainians that was replaced, is supposed to be a lot more competent and supposed to be somebody who has decent enough judgment. He is the same guy who actually stabilized the situation around Volchansk when I was filming around there. And he was also given other tasks of stabilization. And most of those tasks he succeeded in. And so they said, you know what, we're going to put you in head of the ground forces. And I do think this is the right call for the saving of personnel, and considering that the Ukrainians do not know when their next aid shipments are really going to be approved from the United States, if they are going to be approved from the United States, outside of what has already been approved and is down the pipeline, which is that when they say aid has been unfrozen, Trump does not mean, hey guys, I'm passing new aid, we're going to send more tax. No, what he means is the stuff that's already been approved, I'm going to send that. They don't know when that's going to come, if it's going to come. And while they want to hold this leverage, they need to preserve the munitions, the manpower, and the armored vehicles that they have for other battles. Definitely, since, you know, they don't know if this is going to last again a few more months or a few more years. And so that's, I think, the call that they're making, considering that they no longer have the support from the United States. Also, air support from the United States, air defense from the United States, air defense from the United States getting cut off. That not only hurts Ukrainian cities, but it also makes it a lot easier for Russian aircraft to operate near the front. And Sudzha is somewhere where Russian cabs, Russian airstrikes, Russian air power would very much like to brutalize. And I think they're making the calculation that it's better to pull back and live to fight another day than trying to hold on to this leverage by doubling down and dedicating more resources when they don't know when those next resources are going to come. So what does this mean? So it means that they've lost this leverage. It means that the Ukrainians can redeploy these troops, even though they're probably going to have to keep some troops in Sumy to stop possibly the Russians trying to do more incursions in other areas. That was something that was talked about before the Kursk incursion. And while we don't know how legitimate that threat was, if the Russians saw an opportunity, I don't think they would be shy to take it. And I think they would probably like to repay the humiliation that was done to them in Kursk by the fact that, you know, this whole operation happened in the first place. And I mean, I know Putin's enthusiastic about it because look at him. He's in uniform. Have you ever seen him in uniform? I've never seen him in uniform like this before. Certainly not recently. And man, I mean, that, you know, he's showing himself now that there's a front foot advance where the Russians are pushing the Ukrainians out of Kursk. Now all of a sudden he's associated with the armed forces. Now all of a sudden he is, oh, look at me, I'm in charge of the army. When they crossed the border, was that Putin's crisis? Nah, I barely mentioned it on TV, if he mentioned it at all. But now that they're being pushed back, well, it's just my glorious military wisdom. Look, I have the big map in front of me. I've got the, hey, look, he has got a marker to his left. He's got, you know, he's penciling down the statistics and the numbers, and, you know, he's commanding them to victory. Yeah, it must be dire if Putin's in combat mode. Hey, guys, don't make fun of him. Putin's only act this way when they're distressed. My goodness. But my point is, like, yeah, he's energetic about it. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was some attempt to try to repay them across the border. And we know that the Russians have tried to do some excursions around this area. Whether this was just to add pressure to Sudzha or is a wider interest in military operations in Sumy, I don't know. I've talked to the locals in Sumy. I've spent a lot of time filming in Sumy. I've released a documentary about the incursion into Sudzha and the fighting and the damage done to the Sumy area, which I think is a lot more relevant now, too. A few months ago on the DylanBurnsTV channel, if you want to go check that out. But, I mean, I ultimately think it was the right call. As for what the Ukrainians are going to do now, they're going to have to redeploy those troops to the places that they're most needed, solidify the border areas with Russia. Maybe in the future, when the situation changes, they can try another incursion. And this is something I want to put out there, is that this incursion is not something that the Russians are going to take lightly. This incursion across the border is something they're going to want to make sure it does not happen again. Because if it happens once, terrible, humiliating. It happens twice, the message your people have taken is you can't stop it. You just cannot stop it. And so they do not want that message to come out there. So they are going to have the border areas here stationed with troops that elsewise could maybe be deployed inside Ukraine. I am also interested to see, even though some of them which are mobilized can't, and so there might be differences there, but not all the troops that are fighting around there were mobilized troops. A big change that I'm interested in seeing is what the Russians do with the North Koreans. What are the Russians going to do with the North Koreans? Because I thought they were going to go to Kursk originally, which they did. I thought it made sense considering the terms of the agreement that the Russians and the North Koreans were agreeing to. Now what are they going to do? One way of thinking is that they stay within the framework of, okay, they're trying to protect Russia itself. And so in order to not, see what they can get away with, they stay on the border, and the North Koreans basically become Russian border patrol, freeing up Russian soldiers to go do other work elsewhere. That's one way of thinking. Another way of thinking is, hey, those long-range strikes in Russia that the Biden administration did, that was their response to North Korean troop deployments, that they approved the ATACMS strike. This next administration just undercut American aid. This next administration has a huge Euro-Atlantic rift. What is this administration going to do if we put a pedal on the metal? Anything? Maybe the Europeans will do something, but what are they going to do? Sanction us, really? And so there could be a motivation by the North Koreans because they just don't think that there's enough counterweight or counter leverage to see what else they can get away with, see how much this North Korean mercenary program can benefit the Hermit Kingdom. And that could mean North Korean troops inside Ukraine itself. Now, there have been reports about this before, but to be completely honest with you, I have not been able to confirm any of those reports, no matter who I've talked to about it, outside of rumors or things that I couldn't publish even if I wanted to. So just point is, nothing provable. But now, I'm interested to see if the Russians try to test the waters more. I would not be surprised if they did by moving the North Korean troops into Ukraine, both tying themselves deeper into the war, crossing another territorial boundary, the international borders of Ukraine, but also digging North Korean forces deeper into Europe, deeper as an invading force into Europe.
Burns is an immoral,
and I don't know if where they would put them. There's a million different places that they could be of some use right now. They could probably be of use outside of Pokrovsk right now to add pressure to the city, pin down Ukrainian units. They could probably be used in Toretsk right now to try to stabilize the situation as the Russians are dealing with the threat of encirclement there and are being pushed out of the city slowly. I could see them being put, near where Vasily Novosilka was, in order to try to add more pressure there, to capture more villages, just see how much, there's a bunch of places that they could be put. And so I'm sure they could find a use for the North Koreans in Ukraine. It's just a question of whether they're going to be willing to cross that border. And I would argue right now, there's not a lot that would be motivating them to not do that. Outside of the fact that the Russians thinking it's not worth it, they could just do border patrol anyway. So I think what the Ukrainians are probably going to be thinking, and a lot of people are going to be thinking right now, is what leverage can the Ukrainians gain now that the Sudzha withdrawal has happened. Some people are going to inevitably think another incursion, okay? We got through in Kursk. Maybe we can try again in Belgorod, even though the Ukrainians have tried this plenty of times. Or maybe they try this somewhere else. For example, they go into, well, it doesn't really matter which border region, but the point is they go into another border region, whether it's Klintsy or Bryansk or whatever, it doesn't matter. Point is, another incursion. And I understand the motivation behind that. For all of the humiliation a second incursion would do, the Russians are going to be more prepared than the first time. They're going to be looking out for the tricks that the Ukrainians used the first time. You know, when you're actively attacking and you're just hanging amongst the civilians, be in civilian uniform, hide your vehicles this way. They're going to be looking out for that stuff. And so trying to pull this off a second time is going to be more difficult. It's going to be more risky, and it takes a lot of resources. And one particular resource that it takes that Ukraine needs right now is manpower. Manpower. So I think that the Ukrainians engaging in another incursion right now is not likely. Who knows what'll change in a year and a half if the war continues to that point and the Donald Trump peace operation 52 days in continues to fail. But as of right now, I don't think that's what they're going to do. What I think that they're going to do, and I think one of the main ways that we're going to hear about Ukrainian leverage is not only just making it, concentrating on making it as costly as possible for the Russians to advance and see what they can take back on the Ukrainian side to, make the Russians think, like, oh, snap, maybe advancing right now is a little bit more difficult, especially since the Russians right now are preparing for spring. I think that they're going to launch an offensive. Now, whether that is going to be a sizable big offensive like some analysts are warning about, or it's going to be whatever they can scrape together to try to drive the point home that, hey, we can continue to add the pressure. Let's capture some villages here. I don't know. Maybe it'll be something in between. In fact, I think I think that's likely. But the Ukrainians are going to want to get prepared for that offensive regardless, and that means the redeployment of these troops. So I don't think it's going to be another incursion across the border. I think one of the other big ways is going to be drones. And I know drones has been a big part of the war. FPVs, no, I'm talking about long-range drones that the Ukrainians, even though they're going to be producing a lot of FPVs as well this year, I'm talking about the long-range drones that the Ukrainians have been using to target Moscow's oil refineries. The machines that keep the war machine churning. And while no blows from the drone campaign the Ukrainians have been doing up to this point, which, by the way, really only picked up late 2023, early 2024, everything up to that point was low scale with such small warheads. They couldn't do any significant damage. It was really early 2024 that it started to pick up. And I think this year, 2025, is going to be the year of the long-range drone for Ukraine. I think we're going to see more long-range drone attacks against the Russians than the rest of the war combined. And I'm going off of right now, if predictions from the Ukrainian government, talking about 30,000 drones produced this year. Now, let's cut that number in half. That's still an incredible amount of drones. But if they get anywhere near that number, 80% of that number, 75% of that number, that's going to be more drones than Ukraine has launched at Russia at any other year of the war. But if they get close to that, all of the war combined. And that's on top of the long-range missile drone hybrids that they're saying they're producing 3,000 of this year. Whether those numbers are accurate, I presume that to some degree that they're inflated. But even taking into account that inflation, we can just listen to the Russian numbers. The Russians used to say, oh, wow, there was a dozen drones launched at us from the Ukrainians. They took out a few oil refineries. That's annoying. I can't believe they would terrorize us like this. Then became dozens, and now it's triple digits. So drone production is increasing in Ukraine, and so these numbers, or at least the talking of this drone production picking up and drone attacks picking up, it's not coming out of nowhere. In fact, right before the talks in Saudi Arabia, the Ukrainians did a massive drone attack against Moscow oil refineries across the whole country. Over 100 drones, one of the largest Ukrainian drone attacks of the entire war. Seemingly, I think, not only to add pressure on the Russians, but to also get a point across to the Americans about what cards they do have and what cards they still retain. And as much as any type of sanctions relief would help the Russian war machine. If the Ukrainians are continuing to drone strike oil refineries, it's going to be difficult for any American businessman to feel too confident in investing in Russian infrastructure. Maybe they'll invest in other fields, but the point is, Ukraine still retains this card. This is a card that is only getting more powerful, and I think it's going to be one of the main ways that Ukraine brings the war to Russia, and that's what they need to. That's what I think the Ukrainians are going to be looking for, something to replace the Kursk incursion for bringing the war to Russia. And they've done drones before, but it's within their means, and it's something that doesn't just touch Kursk. It's something that touches all across Russia. Because let me tell you, I've been in villages that are in the path of major cities like Kiev when drones pass overhead. It's happened during stream. It's happened off stream. And you hear those drones. You hear the drones passing over you. You hear the sound. It sounds like a lawnmower going over your head. And so the more these drones that are being thrown across Russia, the more difficult it is for somebody to just ignore the day-to-day existence of the violence. And so I think this is what Ukraine's going to be concentrating on to bringing the war home to Russia. Other incursion, I don't think likely in the near future. I think Ukraine has more than enough on its hands trying to deal with Russian attacks around Pokrovsk and trying to retake Toretsk or any other number of parts on the Ukraine front. No Kursk? What do you mean no Kursk? We talked about Kursk. We just said they withdrew. They're gone. They're out. Look, you can see it right here. If you guys are curious to what it looks like, here it is. Here they are, raising their Russian flag over Sudzha. It's not the State Department's choice. No, it's not the State Department's choice to withdraw. It's, I think, probably somebody's common sense. Probably the leader of the ground forces thinking, like, look, we're having a hard enough time fighting for our own land. That negotiation didn't happen. If they continue to get a constant stream of American aid with new committed aid packages, they probably have stayed. They maybe even would have rededicated resources to deal with the Russian flank into the position, but that's not the world we live in. You can't be a journalist and have even a chance you could carry a weapon unless you're the Polish foreign minister. Yes, unless you're the Polish foreign minister.